This is the United Podcast Network.
This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. Given the current environment, there's a heightened global awareness around the need to sanitize our surroundings and practice with diligence our approach to cleaning. We're all very concerned with that. And this process has always been a regulated and essential part of drug manufacturing, one that requires planning, validation, and documentation. In today's episode, we will learn some strategies for simplifying the cleaning validation activities and achieving efficiencies throughout the process. To help us do that, we've invited Rich Forsyth back to provide some insights into product and equipment grouping and setting worst case parameters. So welcome back, Rich. Great to have you again.
Thanks, Stacey. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. Such a timely topic, even though it's one that I know you've been working in this area for decades, right? Is this something that's very important to pharmaceutical manufacturing, yet there is certainly a heightened awareness around this and maybe, even some added pressure when the FDA and other regulators return to auditing, post-pandemic, but we'll see.
For sure.
So anyway, Rich, thanks again for joining us. Previously, we discussed the importance of precise cleaning validation protocols with best practice using the life cycle approach. And as cleaning programs are necessary in regulated industries, like we just said, let's provide listeners with some strategies for simplifying the cleaning process. Before we jump into the how-tos of grouping and worst-case parameter setting, let us fill us in with some thoughts and ideas on why these strategies are so important to the cleaning program.
Well, Stacey, the strategies you develop up front are critical to your program because if you don't have them settled at the beginning, then you're going to end up running into roadblocks or bumps in the road and having to adjust midstream, and that's going to cause you problems. And you're right, you need as efficient a strategy as you can to understand it, to execute it, and then also be able to explain it to the regulatory authorities, because you don't want to get too complicated with them either.
Of course. Absolutely. And we are looking for the most efficient and effective ways to manage our cleaning programs, right? Because you don't want to have to do too much, but you certainly don't want to do too little.
Correct.
So when should an organization consider using the product or equipment grouping methodology?
Well, the cleaning strategy needs to be developed prior to starting any CV activities. And that includes product and equipment grouping. Ideally, generally, what I do is I develop a project plan with all of the activities that go into executing a cleaning validation and schedule them out, because a lot of them will be running in parallel. And a lot of them, some of them require much more time than others. So you want to stagger your start and finish times so that you can execute those strategies.
So are we looking at, if you're a company that produces only a couple of products, then maybe grouping is not necessary. But if you're a company like most of the, like all of the global pharma manufacturers, and many of the smaller manufacturers as well, have multiple products, and that's when this strategy is really most effective. Is that true? The grouping. Yeah. No,
I understand. And when you said that, I thought, well, if I had any more than two products, I would probably try and group just for the efficiencies of it.
Okay. This is a process that really just about every manufacturer, unless they're a single product manufacturer, could benefit from.
Pretty much, yeah, because cleaning validation is very. It takes a while to execute it, And once you go through it once, you don't really want to go through it again.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I definitely get that. And you mentioned that you really want to do all of this up front before you even launch into a cleaning program.
Absolutely.
So what activities need to take place in preparation for grouping, and what expectations exist around the need for, detailed SOPs in the company's cleaning validation master plan or cleaning validation policy statement?
Well, for grouping strategy, the easiest is to get a listing of all the products in the facility. That's pretty straightforward.
Right.
Then you need their permitted daily exposures, which is the amount that a person can ingest in a given day over for the period of lifetime with no adverse effects. So that helps you set your cleaning limits. And a lot of companies still don't have those in place yet. So you need to get them. The next is to get a comprehensive list of the manufacturing equipment. And it never seems to be as straightforward as you would think, because companies are very diligent about adding equipment to their inventory when they buy new equipment, but less so when they retire equipment or haven't used it for a while, because they don't take it off their active equipment list because they always figure, well, I might use it again sometime. So you usually end up with equipment that people have forgotten about, that they don't use, and then you have to decide whether to keep that equipment on the list or not. As far as the strategy, it should go into your CVMP, if at all possible, as much detail. I mean, you should at least, if you're going to do the grouping strategy, you should at least describe the grouping strategy in high-level terms in your CVMP, and that's usually going to be the first document you develop. So you have to have the endpoint in mind basically before you start. You want to map out your entire project and know where you want to get to, and that's the best thing to do. As far as the detailed SOPs, and here I'm talking mostly about the cleaning SOPs for the equipment.
Of course.
For the most part, they're going to need some kind of upgrade. They'll be missing something. Generally, they'll be missing critical cleaning parameters, like how long you're going to clean it, and that's mostly in manual cleaning. They typically manual procedures say, get a brush and clean it, and you can't control it that way. So you have to have some critical cleaning parameters in there, such as the length of time, the concentration of detergent, if you're going to control the water temperature, that type of thing. What you feel are necessary to provide a consistent cleaning. And if you think about it, there's going to be an SOP for every piece of equipment. So that is probably the biggest chunk of work out there for a cleaning program, and it takes months to do. So you want to get started on that as soon as possible, just so you can have them in place by the time your cleaning validation is complete.
Yeah, it sounds like quite an extensive process just to get all of the pieces together, right? To to create a cleaning program. So we have our list of products, assuming we have our list of equipment. Grouping of products and equipment are then based on a single cleaning process. So is that true? And
yes.
Or do you have multiple cleaning processes going on?
The common cleaning process is the key. That allows you to group all the products and all the equipment that are cleaned using that process. As soon as you have a second cleaning process, you have double the validation work.
Right. That's what I would think. So we're looking at a single cleaning process, ideally. And what are the criteria then that need to be met in order for us to use a product or equipment grouping strategy? So what are we grouping by, I guess?
That's the subjective part, I guess. I want to make it as simple as possible. So initially, I will try and go in and group all the products, everything, regardless whether like a tablet and a capsule will be made on some different equipment, some common equipment, but some different equipment. But I'm going to try and group them anyway, just to make the explanation of the program more simple. And if I can group all the products, then that's great. I mean, there might be times where you're forced to do separate validations for, like, if you have a solid formulation versus a liquid formulation where they don't see any of the same products. So to get all the equipment covered, you might have to do another validation. But generally, you're going to have to do at least 2 validations to cover everything anyway. So you really don't want to make more work than you have to. I mean, I was in a client 2 years ago, and they had 7 different cleaning procedures. And
that has to be hair raising. Like, how do you manage all of that?
They can't. They could not. They couldn't. You can execute something once, and that's a lot of work. But trying to maintain more than 1 or 2 cleaning processes becomes practically impossible. Then you start falling into non-compliance with trying to maintain that. So it just doesn't work out.
So you mentioned a tablet versus a capsule. To me, those could be similar products, right? They're just a little bit different in the delivery, formulation and delivery.
Right.
But so are we grouping by similar products, or are we grouping by products that use the same equipment or equipment train, or are we grouping by same cleaning SOPs, or all of the above?
I try not to define how I'm grouping my products. I want to try and group them all if possible, even if they're different types of formulations. And then if I have to break down the groupings a little bit more, I will if I have to. But
Sure.
Understanding that every time you do that, another grouping, especially for products, that's another validation.
Right.
So,
right. And I get that. We're trying to limit the number of different processes that we have going on and the number of times we have to validate, right? Or the number of validations we have to do. And I'm just trying to really get at what are the best practices for, most organizations, if they're developing a new cleaning program, or even updating their old cleaning program,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, and I usually try and group all my products and group the equipment as closely as possible, or have as few equipment groups, just so I have more flexibility going into my cleaning validation. The more you differentiate the products and the equipment, the harder it makes your life down the road. And that's what I mean about getting that strategy up front. You have to explain what your intention is up front, so you can execute that and then be able to defend it at the end.
Right, exactly. So if you define your strategy and you are clear about what you're doing in your SOPs and your cleaning validation master plan, and everything you do thereafter supports what you said, then ideally you're in a good spot, as long as it works.
Yes, as long as it works, that's true. You're in a better spot. I mean, when agencies come in, they want to be able to understand what you're telling them. Right. So the simpler that is, but also they want to see if you understand what you're doing and if you have confidence in the system, because when you define a hardest to clean product, we'll go through this, but you'll have some data, but there'll be some subjectivity to it also, and which can be challenged. And you have to understand that and be able to explain how you're addressing that.
Sure. And that's like everything we do in pharmacy.
Absolutely.
Right. Every process we have, every protocol we write. So, Rich, once we establish the group, so you have your groupings, we need to choose a representative product for evaluation. So walk us through the hardest to clean evaluation, and is it necessary to conduct a lab-based simulated cleaning process, or do you have another way of doing this?
Yes and no. The more data you have, the better.
Right.
So a lab assessment is valuable. And I've done some of them myself, and you end up getting some variable data. So you'll have data and you'll have an answer, but it probably isn't definitive. I take a three-pronged approach. I'll look at the easiest is to look at the formulations and look at the different components, the API and the excipients, and individually look at each of their solubilities and whether, like some excipients will be hydrophobic. So they'll get gummy when you hit them with water. So I'll evaluate that and do an evaluation on hardest to clean from that perspective. And then just probably even more valuable, go and speak to the operators, the people who actually have to clean the equipment and work with the equipment. And they will definitely have an opinion as what is hardest to clean for them. And that obviously that opinion will vary based on what area they're in, and that's fine. So you have a formulation assessment, you'll have a personnel experience assessment, and I'll take both of them, take 2 or 3 or 4 of the hardest to clean products, the ones that overlap both assessments, they definitely get tested in the laboratory, and then submit them for laboratory testing. Because if the more products you have, you can't really do that lab assessment for all of them. So you want to cut it down as much as you can. And those first 2 assessments are not that labor intensive, so you can arrive at them pretty quickly. And then I would submit them for lab testing and get the appropriate cleaning conditions. And again, the worst case product there. And if you find a worst case product that agrees across all 3, you're home free. I've never seen it though.
That would be a stroke of luck.
Yeah. They usually, the top 5 are usually jumbled, but they're usually somewhat close. I do have a client right now where we did the personnel assessment, but they had converted some of their cleaning to detergent, but some they were doing still with water. So it made the assessment, I guess, less value added because the personnel, all their hardest to clean were products that were still being cleaned with just water. So I guess that eases their decision. Now they're moving to all detergent washing.
Sure.
But it made the assessment a little bit more difficult.
I can imagine, because you're looking at 2 completely different ways of cleaning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when we're looking at this, we're looking at hardest to clean. So, I guess that's those pieces of equipment that either the product adheres to them and it's difficult to remove it, or they have nooks and crannies, I guess, that are difficult to get into to do the cleaning. Are we also looking at the products to see which are, the most dangerous products or the most toxic, I guess, toxicity? So, you need to spend more time on cleaning those type of materials. How does that work exactly?
Yeah. Okay. So you want to look at the cleaning limits for the product. So that's kind of getting at your toxicity issue. Right. So you're going to calculate a cleaning limit for every product. And how do you do that? You start with the PDE and you throw in other factors like the next batch size and the dose of the next product and the surface area of the equipment. As an example, if I have a facility with 10 products, I'm going to calculate the limit of each product against the other 9 products.
Sure. So
I'll have 9 cleaning limits, and then I'll take the lowest of those 9, and that's my cleaning limit for that product.
Gotcha.
So then you'll have a lowest cleaning limit for each product.
Yep.
But then you'll also have one lowest overall cleaning limit.
Okay. And so you assume if you're cleaning to the lowest
exactly
cleaning limit, then it's sufficient to clean everything, right?
Correct. And you take the hardest to clean product.
Right.
So if I can clean that product down to that lowest limit, then all my products are covered. And again, it would be a stroke of luck if your hardest to clean product had the lowest limit, but that's generally not the case.
Right. So you're looking at least at those 2 parameters when you're setting this up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. For the products. Yes.
Right. Exactly. So does that require doing two separate sets of testing for every product in the portfolio to look at the hardest to clean and the lowest, the residue limits?
No. You could. I mean, logically, that's what you would think you would do.
Yeah.
What I would do, so say out of my 10 products, product A had a high limit and the lowest limit was for another product.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to clean product A. That's my hardest to clean product, but my target is going to be that lowest overall cleaning limit. So if I can clean the hardest to clean product to levels below that lowest limit, then I can clean physically, I can clean every product, and I can clean it low enough that it's enough for every product. Now that although that's going to be my target for validation, I'm still going to keep the calculated limits that I've arrived at for each product, because you don't want to use the lowest overall limit for everything, because now you're just putting yourself at a higher risk for failure for another product unnecessarily.
Sure. Yeah. And we know we're striving for efficiency and accuracy here. So you want to make sure that when you're writing your SOPs and just coming up with your overall procedures, that you're taking this into account up front and you don't have to make changes.
Right. I mean, ideally, you can do one validation on one product and cover all your equipment groups. And again, I've never seen that happen either. So you're generally going to end up having to do at least two validations to cover all of your equipment groups.
Right.
So, if you threw in another cleaning process, now you've doubled your work. So you can see how the workload will go up geometrically, depending on what kind of strategy you develop.
Yeah, absolutely. So less is more in this case.
Absolutely.
Rich, are there procedural differences in product grouping versus equipment grouping?
Absolutely, yes. That's an interesting point, because we talk about the hardest to clean product,
right? And
I've heard some people talk about the hardest to clean equipment, and that would be lovely if they coincided, but again, they don't.
Right. In the real world, these things rarely line up.
No. So the way I group equipment is it's easy to group by like unit operation, like tablet presses, blenders, that type of thing.
Right.
And if you do manual cleaning or a CIP cleaning, then that's going to be different. But generally, I use the unit operation, the geometry. I consider the size, but then most importantly is how it's presented for cleaning. And what I mean by that is how much is a piece of equipment disassembled for cleaning.
Sure.
You think of like a tablet press. I mean, they have that tooling, and there's a lot of small parts there. Well, that's all disassembled for cleaning. So it's from a manual cleaning procedure, it's not too bad, although tablet presses are just a pain in the neck to clean. So it depends how the equipment is cleaned in the washroom or in the parts washer, or whether it's a CIP system. I try and group, and then I try and limit the groups as much as possible. And that's because I've paid the price for that. In my first validation, we did the validation and we covered, I think, 90% of the equipment. And right. there were other pieces that we didn't consider them the same at the time. And this is 20 years later. I don't think that those pieces have ever gotten us validated for cleaning. So,
wow, yeah.
It's
so you relying on worst case evaluation for equipment as well.
I don't call it worst case. I call it, you group your equipment by how similar they are, as opposed to how different they are.
Gotcha.
And you have to be careful, because again, that's going to be somewhat subjective. I had a client a couple years ago where we had the QA representative came in, and talking about validating packaging equipment, and he goes, well, this hopper is different than that hopper for tablets because that's got a baffle in it. It's like, and after my eyes popped out of my head, I said, well, we if we did that, then we'd be doing validation for just about every packaging line in the facility, let alone manufacturing line. So his philosophy was to look at differences rather than how they were similar.
Gotcha.
And yeah, a lot of equipment are going to have slight differences, and that's okay as long as the differences are addressed in the individual cleaning SOPs. So it has a special place that usually is a problem, then that should be noted in the SOP.
You identify it, right? You put a picture of what you're talking about, so whoever's doing the cleaning can pay close attention to that. But that doesn't affect the way you're grouping the equipment.
Correct. You want to simplify the grouping as much as possible. I said I try to be very aggressive with my grouping to drive the number of groups down rather than up.
That makes sense. So I always like to know what are some of the most common mistakes made in industry while establishing, in this case, grouping procedures. So that sounds like maybe that could be one of them, that they have too many different groups or too many different variables.
Yes, actually, that's one I hadn't thought about, but you're absolutely right. If you over diversify your equipment grouping, that's a huge problem, and I have seen that. Early one I run into is people use solubility of the API in water, and that's how they define their worst case, and that's all they use, and that is it's certainly not indicative of what's hardest to clean, because the API is generally a minor component in a formulation.
Right.
So that's not going to be indicative of hardest to clean. Another one is using worst case parameters to calculate the cleaning limit. So as I said, when I have 10 products, I'll calculate the limit of one product against the other 9. And you could limit those calculations by just saying, okay, well, I'm going to take the smallest batch size. I'm going to take the largest surface area, any way to minimize that limit.
Right.
And that's defendable, but it's going to drive your cleaning limits down. So it's going to increase the risk that you'll have a cleaning failure. So I will try and get my cleaning limits as high as possible so I can lower my risk. That being said, the expectation is if you clean equipment to a visible level, I would expect that 95% of your test results will come back 0 or less than your level of detection. So it's not that if you have a high limit, you don't have to clean it, but the visual limit will generally be down very low. So
Okay.
You're going to test it and you're going to confirm that. Okay, yeah, the one about the multiple cleaning processes, if you have that in a facility, yeah, you're pretty much doomed.
Headache, right?
Yeah. And that happens when a new product gets introduced, you get, the development facility will tell you, okay, this is how we cleaned it, and they'll just transfer the cleaning process over. So now they've got a new cleaning process.
Right.
And it'll clean that product, but now you've got another validation on your hands. And that's kind of how cleaning processes get diversified like that. And that's problematic. I'm sure there's other mistakes.
Well, there's some key. No, you did, but you highlighted some key things that definitely can go wrong. And it sounds like it would be easy to make those mistakes, right? Because unless you've done this multiple times, it's easy to fall into the trap where you think if I have more groupings, then I'm addressing more issues, but really you're making the process harder.
Right. The reason I know most of these mistakes is I've probably made them at one time or another. So
Sure. Fair enough. We all make those mistakes once, but hopefully not twice.
Yes.
Rich, what are the regulatory agencies looking for when inspecting a facility that uses the grouping strategy, and what considerations should be made, prior to a site visit?
Well, if you're making adjustments for a site visit, then you're probably already too late.
Not adjustments, but considerations, right? So are there things that they need to think about, and just knowing what a regulator is going to be looking for?
I mean, they want as simple and straightforward an explanation of your cleaning validation program as you can get. So say we validate the worst case product and we cover all the equipment groups in our validation. That's what they want to hear. But more than that, they want to know that you understand what you're talking, the company understands what they're talking about and is able to, clearly articulate that and be able to answer any questions about it. Because if they have confidence that you have confidence in what you're doing, then that heads off a lot of questions.
Sure. I mean, obviously you have to document cleaning failures if you have any, and what you've done to remediate
correct
that issue.
And yeah, I mean, and that's difficult, especially with a manual procedure, because invariably you're going to have some visual failures for cleaning, especially on manual procedures, because somebody will miss a spot, just like doing the dishes at home.
Right.
And my wife certainly has much better eyes than I do. So, I thought I had cleaned something and she'll just look at me. So it's the same thing, with
the
equipment.
Error factor, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if somebody does the inspection of the equipment while it's still a little bit wet, because that will hide residue as it dries. So you want to make sure it's visually clean. And if that happens once, okay. But the problem is if it happens repeatedly, then you've got a problem. Either the people aren't executing the procedure's not detailed enough, or worst of all, the cleaning doesn't work. So that's where that is, and that's why, especially if you have manual cleaning, you want to have a robust cleaning process that is more than you need. You don't want to have something where you really have to work hard to get it clean. You want that to come off fairly easily, so you can clean equipment to the right level on a repeated basis.
That makes 100% sense. I have a quick follow-up question to you, because you've mentioned a couple of times, I think you said within 90% visual clean, or 95. I don't remember the exact number, but you're talking about visual, like clean to your eyesight, basically, right?
Correct. Yes.
See, anything left. Are there instances where, the product, and I guess this would fall into your hardest to clean, but where the product, you wouldn't necessarily see the residue, so you have to be extremely careful, particularly if it's a manual process, right? So, when it's an automated process, often we can use much hotter solutions. We can, maybe scrub more efficiently. I don't know. I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if there are special instances where, the visual clean is just not going to be sufficient.
Yes, you're correct, but that would generally be for products that have very low cleaning limits, very toxic products or hormone products. So the cleaning limit is actually so low it's below the visual limit. So you can, the visual inspection for those type of products is not all that value added, because you can't even be sure whether it passes the limit. So that's where you rely on the swab testing or the rinse testing to pass your validation. And know that, but you have to get that especially clean, but you want to be following the same cleaning process. So you have to be careful how you say that. We don't clean this one especially good because it's got a lower clean. We clean them all the same. So we can
right,
clean.
and that makes sense. I mean, I was just trying to think. I am not an expert in this particular area, in the cleaning, validation, and procedural area. But that just was popped in my head. Like, there's got to be sometimes, even if it's a small amount,
Yes,
where,
And that's a good question, and that's something you would get from an agency inspector. And depending on how you answer that, it could lead you down another rabbit hole that you don't want to go.
Right. I mean, I guess basically you're saying, yes, we've taken that into consideration and we're sure that our process works, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And you have to say it with confidence.
Exactly. Perfect. And it really is, it goes back to what you said at the very beginning of this conversation. If you plan for it ahead of time and you're confident in your procedures, and you carry out the cleaning process the way you described, then really there shouldn't be any failures.
Correct. And you put a lot of work into it. So if and when you do get a failure, it is a big deal. I mean, whenever anything like happens, the first response is user error or something like that.
Right.
And you can get away with that once, but if it happens more than once, now you're starting to indicate a bigger problem, and perhaps that your validation isn't validated. So right. It has fairly big implications there.
Yeah, I would think so. I definitely would think so. Well, Rich, some great information today as part of this discussion. Hopefully our listeners are walking away with several little tidbits that they can add to their cleaning toolkit. In closing, though, I wanted to see if you have any last thoughts or ideas that you'd like to leave our listeners with.
When we talked about the hardest clean product, I said often that it's not very clear cut. It's not obviously clear cut. So right. You'll have 2 or 3 options, and you'll choose one to validate and say that's the hardest to clean. And the way you answer that, if that question is brought up, well, what about these other products? What you do then is you get them into your continued process verification program as soon as possible. So after you're done your validation, you're going to continue and do periodic testing of your equipment to show that you're still in control.
Sure.
So you get those other products that might have been considered the hardest to clean and test them fairly early on to show that you made the right decision, and hopefully not that you made the wrong decision.
Yeah, because then you have to start all over again, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you'd at least have to you'd have to validate that product, and you'd be scrambling trying to explain why your program is still validated, because that's and again, that you have to have confidence that your cleaning procedure works just as well for all the products. Yeah,
I agree. So the best advice then is to do all your work, do your due diligence upfront, make sure you're correct, and then once you establish that program and you have your periodic verifications or testing in place, like, you should be good to go.
Oh, of course we'll be good to go.
Exactly. Well, that's a great tip. A great tip for all our listeners out there. And I thank you again for being our guest today, Rich Forsyth.
Thank you, Stacey.
Also want to give a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen, and the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And lastly, a big thanks to you, our valued listeners. If you have topic requests or guest suggestions, we would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this episode, we ask you to subscribe in your podcast player of choice so you'll never miss an episode. And don't forget to share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks. The more industry info we get out there, the better we all will be. So for today's show notes and information on this podcast, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another great discussion. Until then, stay healthy and safe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.